Hello everyone, and welcome back to ET Diaries. Here on this channel, I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I used to work in the Air Force as a radar operator. It wasn't a glamorous job like being a pilot or anything, but I liked it. It was steady, and you got used to the hum of the equipment and the endless green blips on the screen. Most nights were uneventful. I'd sit in my little room, drink bad coffee, and watch for anything unusual, though nothing ever was. This night started like any other. The clock said 10:47 p.m. when I noticed something strange on my radar. At first, I thought it was just a glitch. Sometimes the equipment acts up, But this was different. It wasn't a random blip or static. It was a solid contact, and it was moving fast, way faster than anything we had or anything I knew could fly. The speed was the first thing that didn't make sense. I called over one of the other guys, Harris. He's been doing this longer than me, and I thought he'd explain it away, but he didn't. He just stared at the screen and then had his mouth tightening like he was trying to figure out a puzzle he didn't like. "That's not right," he said finally. "What do you mean?" I asked. "It's jumping," he said, pointing at the screen. And he was right. 1 second the object would be in one place, and then it'd blink out and show up somewhere else entirely. Not a smooth movement, but like it was skipping chunks of space in between. That's not how anything flies. Not planes, not drones, not missiles. Nothing. We logged it and called it in, and soon the room wasn't quiet anymore. People came in, higher-ups with serious faces, all asking the same thing. What's its heading? What altitude? How fast? And the thing is, we couldn't give them clear answers. The numbers didn't make sense. 1 second, it was moving at speeds that should have melted it into the atmosphere, and the next, it was practically hovering. Then it would disappear entirely for a few seconds before showing up miles away. They scrambled a jet to intercept it. I watched the radar as the pilot got closer. The object was still jumping around, but it seemed like it was letting the jet catch up, like it wanted us to see it. Then, as soon as the pilot got within visual range, the thing vanished off my screen entirely. I thought it was gone for good. But then the pilot came over the radio. His voice was shaky, and I could hear his breathing. "It's here," he said. "It's right in front of me." We all listened. The room was dead silent except for his voice. It's like nothing I've ever seen. It's shimmering. Like it's not solid. Like it's there and not there at the same time. Then he yelled something I couldn't make out, and his signal went dead. His jet showed up on the radar again, flying erratically. He was heading back to base, and when he landed, they rushed him out of the cockpit like he was sick or something. I never got to talk to him after that. The object came back a few minutes later. It was over the base this time, just sitting there, stationary on the radar. Everyone was on edge. You could feel it, this tight, electric kind of tension in the air. Someone asked if they should scramble more jets, but the commander said no. He was watching the screen, his jaw clenched. "Let's see what it does," he said. What it did was terrifying. It started flickering again, disappearing and reappearing, but now it was closer every time. First, it was a mile out, then half a mile, then right over the base, and then every screen in the room went black. Just like that. No warning. The lights stayed on, but all the equipment was dead. I remember just sitting there, staring at my blank screen, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Harris was muttering under his breath, "This isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right." Then there was this sound. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't loud exactly, but it was wrong. Like metal bending and glass shattering, but deeper, slower, like it was underwater. It felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The power came back after what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. The object was gone. No trace of it on the radar. Nothing in the sky. Just gone, like it had never been there. They told us not to talk about it. Officially, it was a radar malfunction. That's what they wrote in the logs, and that's what we were told to say if anyone asked. But we all knew what we saw. We all felt it. I transferred out a few months later. I told myself it was just time for a change. But the truth is, I didn't want to be there if it came back. I didn't want to be sitting in that room, staring at that screen, waiting for something I couldn't explain or fight. I still think about it, though, especially at night. I'll be lying in bed and I'll hear a plane fly over, and for a split second, I'll wonder if it's them. Whatever they were, whatever it was, I'll never forget the sound, that deep, wrong sound. Sometimes I hear it in my dreams, and every time I wake up thinking, what if it wasn't the last time? I was up in the air, doing what I had trained for years to do. Flying had always been second nature to me, something I didn't even think about anymore. It was just part of who I was. That day was supposed to be routine. It was a training flight, a chance to practice maneuvers and stay sharp. Clear skies, good weather, nothing unusual. But what happened up there has stayed with me every second since. I was in the cockpit of the T-38, running through drills at about 20,000 feet. The air was steady and the jet hummed like it always did, a constant vibration that feels alive when you've been flying long enough. I had my helmet on, the radio crackling now and then with chatter from the tower and the other trainees in the exercise. Everything was normal, until it wasn't. It started as a feeling, not the kind of thing you can describe clearly, just a nagging sense that something was wrong. I've felt that before, but usually it's tied to something I can pinpoint, an engine sound that's off, a pressure drop, something mechanical. This was different. It wasn't coming from the jet. It was coming from outside. I checked my instruments. Everything was fine. The altitude was steady, no alarms, no turbulence. The sky was so clear I could see for miles in every direction. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was up there with me. I glanced to my left, then my right. Nothing. Just sky. I scanned the horizon looking for any sign of another aircraft, a bird, even a stray cloud. But there was nothing. It was empty. Still, I couldn't shake it. My eyes kept darting to the edges of my vision, like I was trying to catch something that wasn't there. And then I saw it. Not directly, but just out of the corner of my eye. A shadow. It wasn't on the ground, though. It was in the air, moving with me, keeping pace. I turned my head to get a better look, but the second I did, it was gone. My heart started racing. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe a reflection off the canopy or a cloud shadow playing tricks. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I kept flying, trying to focus on the drill, but the shadow didn't go away. It stayed there, just at the edge of my vision. Every time I moved my eyes, it seemed to dart just out of sight. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It wasn't shaped like a plane or a bird. It wasn't even solid, not exactly. It was more like a distortion, a shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising off asphalt in the summer. I didn't say anything over the radio. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. But I couldn't ignore it either. I tried shaking my head, blinking, anything to clear my vision. Nothing worked. The shadow stayed. It started moving closer. At first, it was subtle, just a slight drift toward me, like it was curious, watching. Then it got bolder. It shifted from the periphery into my direct line of sight for just a second before vanishing again. It was fast, too fast for me to focus on. But I knew it was there. I could feel it. The instruments in the jet started acting up. The altimeter flickered, the compass spun erratically, and the radio went silent. I tried to stay calm, running through the troubleshooting steps in my head, but nothing worked. The jet itself was fine. No engine trouble, no mechanical failure, but the electronics were going haywire, and the shadow was still there. I tried to pull away to see if I could lose it. I banked hard to the right, then the left, climbing higher into the sky. But it followed me. It didn't matter how fast I went or how sharp I turned, it stayed with me, always just out of reach, just out of focus. That's when I realized it wasn't following me. It was studying me. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. It wasn't random, and it wasn't accidental. Whatever it was watching me, observing how I moved, how the jet responded. It wasn't just a shadow. It was something alive, something intelligent. The thought sent a chill through me. I'd been trained for emergencies, for combat, even for survival in hostile environments. But this wasn't anything I'd ever been prepared for. This wasn't something you could fight or escape from. It was something beyond understanding. I tried to radio the tower, but all I got was static. The shadow shifted again, closer this time, almost touching the jet. I could see it more clearly now, a shimmering outline that seemed to ripple and shift like liquid. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't air either. It was something in between. For a moment, it moved directly in front of me, blocking out the sky. I couldn't see anything but the shadow, a swirling mass of darkness and light that seemed to pulse with energy. I don't know how long it stayed there. Maybe a few seconds, maybe longer. Time felt strange, stretched out and distorted. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The instruments in the jet snapped back to normal. The radio crackled to life, and I heard the tower's voice calling my name, asking if I was okay. I responded as calmly as I could, saying I had experienced some interference, but everything was under control. I didn't mention the shadow. I didn't know how to explain it, and I wasn't sure anyone would believe me if I did. I finished the training exercise and landed back at the base. I went through the post-flight checks, filed my report, and tried to act like nothing had happened. But inside, I was shaken. I couldn't stop thinking about the shadow, about how it had moved, about how it had felt like it was alive. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, the shimmering shape moving in the sky. I don't know what it was or where it came from, but I know it wasn't from here. I haven't seen it again since that day, but I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, watching, waiting. I don't know why it chose me or what it was looking for, but I know one thing for sure, it wasn't human. We were out on a routine patrol, the kind you've done so many times you don't even think about it anymore. The briefing was simple: monitor the airspace, standard formation, nothing unusual. I was part of a fleet of 6 fighter jets, all flying in a tight pattern over open water. It was quiet, calm, the sky so clear you could see the curvature of the earth if you looked long enough. It was one of those days where everything felt easy. Then it didn't. I didn't notice anything at first. We were cruising at altitude, everyone keeping position, radios quiet except for the occasional check-in. I was scanning the sky, same as always, keeping an eye on my instruments, listening to the hum of the jet around me. But something changed. It was subtle at first, like the air got heavier or the light shifted in a way I couldn't explain. I thought it might have been my imagination, but then my instruments started to glitch. It wasn't dramatic at first, just little flickers on the radar screen, numbers on the altimeter shifting for no reason. I radioed the others to see if they were seeing the same thing, but the radio was dead. Just static. I tried switching frequencies, but nothing worked. I could see the other jets in formation, close enough to make out the pilots in their cockpits, but nobody could hear anyone. Then the power flickered. The HUD in my helmet went black for a second, then came back, but it was dimmer, weaker. My heart was pounding by then, but I kept it together, going through the emergency protocols in my head. I still had control of the jet. No engine trouble, no loss of maneuverability, but everything else was going haywire. It wasn't just me, either. The other jets started to break formation, each pilot trying to figure out what was happening on their own. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a glint of light, far off in the distance. It didn't look like anything I'd seen before, not a plane or a bird or even a drone. It was too bright, too precise, like a star that had decided to come closer. It was moving, but not like anything natural. It wasn't flying in a straight line or even a predictable curve. It was darting, stopping, starting like it was testing the air. Then it got closer. The light wasn't just a light. As it approached, I could make out a shape, rounded, smooth, like a drop of liquid metal suspended in the air. It didn't have wings or engines or anything that made sense for flight, but it was moving with purpose, like it was alive. It hovered there for a moment, close enough that I could see my reflection in its surface, distorted and rippling like I was looking into water. The jet controls locked up. I tried to adjust the throttle, the stick, anything, but nothing responded. The other jets were in the same situation, all of us drifting in the air like leaves on a still pond. The object moved between us, slow and deliberate, like it was examining each plane. My breath was caught in my throat. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't from here. One of the jets tried to fire. I could see the flash as the missile launched, but it didn't go anywhere. It just hung there in the air, frozen, like time itself had stopped around it. Then it dissolved, not exploded. Dissolved. It was like the missile melted into nothing, particle by particle, until there was nothing left but a faint wisp of smoke. The object responded then. Not with weapons, not with force, but with light. A beam shot out from its surface, not aimed at any of us, but into the sky above. It wasn't a weapon, I knew that immediately. It was more like a signal, a message written in patterns of light and color that shifted and danced in ways I couldn't understand but couldn't stop watching. I didn't know what to do. None of us did. We were trained for combat, for emergencies, for survival, but this was beyond any of that. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't hostile, at least not yet. It could have destroyed us easily, but it didn't. It was waiting. I thought about the emergency flares we carried, the simplest form of communication we had. It was a long shot, but it was the only idea I had. I managed to get the manual controls for the flare system to work, one of the few things not locked up, and launched a single flare into the sky. The object reacted immediately. The light it emitted changed, shifting to match the color of the flare. Then it moved, slow and deliberate, positioning itself directly in front of my jet. I couldn't breathe. It was so close I felt like I could reach out and touch it. The lights on the object began to pulse, not randomly but in a pattern. I didn't understand it, but it felt intentional, like it was speaking in a language I couldn't hear but could see. I launched another flare, this time a different color. The object responded again, matching the color, pulsing faster. It was communicating. I didn't know what I was saying, but it was listening. We went back and forth like that, flare after flare, each one answered by the object. It didn't make sense, not logically, but I could feel something in the patterns, a rhythm, an understanding forming. It wasn't just light, it was thought, intent. It was alive. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The object shot straight up into the sky, faster than anything I've ever seen, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air where it had been. The controls on the jets came back, the radios crackled to life, and we were left sitting there in stunned silence. We returned to base, filed our reports, went through the debriefing. None of us could explain what had happened, and none of us were sure we wanted to. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't human, but it wasn't a threat either. It could have destroyed us, but it didn't. It wanted something else, something we couldn't fully understand. I think about it every day. The way it moved, the way it communicated, the way it felt like it was trying to tell us something. I don't know if it'll come back, but if it does, I hope we'll be ready to listen. It was supposed to be another step in pushing boundaries, testing the new craft's limits at high altitude. I'd done plenty of these flights, and even though every one carried risks, they had become routine in a way. The briefing was straightforward. Climb as high as the craft could go, record stability and control performance, and gather data for the engineers back at the base. Nothing special. We took off just before dawn to catch clear skies. The craft was experimental, an almost futuristic design with tech that wasn't even public knowledge yet. It was sleek and nimble, designed for extreme conditions. The cockpit was tight, just enough room for me and the instruments. The engines roared as I climbed higher, and higher, breaking through clouds into the pale blue above. By the time I hit the target altitude, everything was running smooth. The Earth stretched below, its curves barely visible, fading into the darkness of space above. The horizon was sharp, cutting the planet from the void. I started running the tests, maneuverability, engine response, fuel efficiency. Everything was by the book until the radar started to blink. At first, I thought it was a glitch. The altitude was messing with the systems, I figured. The display showed a return, something nearby, but it wasn't where it should have been. It moved erratically, fast and unpredictable. I scanned the sky, but there was nothing. Then, in my peripheral vision, something caught the light. It shimmered, barely visible, like a mirage at the edge of the atmosphere. I blinked, thinking maybe my visor was dirty or catching a reflection, but the shape grew clearer. It wasn't part of my craft or debris or anything natural. It was hovering, motionless, not far from me, just on the edge of sight. I kept my hands steady on the controls, my heart pounding. It was metallic but fluid, almost like liquid metal frozen in midair. It had no wings, no seams, nothing human about it. The surface seemed alive, shifting slightly, as though it was breathing. It moved closer, so fast I barely had time to process it. The radar went dead. All instruments flickered, then failed one by one. I was flying blind, relying on my instincts to keep the craft steady. I tapped the controls, toggled switches, trying to reboot something, anything, but the systems were unresponsive. The object came closer, stopping a few meters off my right wing. It rotated slowly, silently, like it was studying me. I didn't move. My training screamed at me to report, to engage, to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. I couldn't take my eyes off it. Then the light changed. A beam, faint but precise, shot out from its surface, scanning across my craft. I felt the vibrations through the controls. It wasn't damaging anything, it was analyzing. I reached for the manual override, trying to re-establish control, but the object reacted. It moved suddenly, positioning itself directly in front of me. My craft jolted, pulled slightly forward, like it was caught in a magnetic field. I thought I was being dragged into it, but then it stopped. The light shifted again, a pattern now, pulsing faintly in colors I'd never seen before. I raised my hand instinctively, a gesture, maybe to show I wasn't a threat. The object pulsed faster, almost like it understood. But then I made the mistake. I moved the controls, testing the responsiveness of the stick. The craft tilted slightly, just enough to break the standoff. The object reacted immediately. The light intensified, blindingly bright, and my whole body tensed as the cockpit filled with vibrations. I realized too late that it interpreted my movement as hostile. The beam struck the craft, not an attack, but a wave of energy that disabled everything. The engines cut out completely, leaving me floating helplessly at the edge of the atmosphere. The silence was deafening, the only sound my own breathing, sharp and panicked. I couldn't do anything but wait. The object hovered, rotating again, slower this time, as though it was reconsidering. Then it moved further away, retreating slightly, still watching. I fumbled for the emergency manual controls, managing to activate a flare release. The bright streak shot into the void, a desperate signal. The object hesitated, the lights dimming slightly. It responded with a pulse of light in return, matching the color of the flare. I launched another flare, a different color. Again, it responded, matching it. The tension began to ease, the vibrations in the cockpit fading. I kept repeating the process, flares and responses, until the object's movements became slower, less erratic. It stayed there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, without warning, it shot upward, vanishing into the dark with a speed that defied logic. The cockpit systems flickered back to life. The engines roared as power returned, and I grabbed the controls, steadying the craft. I radioed the base, my voice shaking as I reported what had happened. They told me to return immediately. I landed safely, shaken but alive, and spent hours in debriefing, recounting every detail. The higher-ups listened without interrupting, taking notes but offering no explanations. I don't know what it was or why it chose to let me go. All I know is that it could have ended me if it wanted to. It wasn't hostile, not really, but it was cautious, like it didn't trust us any more than we trust the unknown. It was a routine patrol flight. I had done the pre-flight checks, fueled up, and taken off like I had hundreds of times before. The sky was clear that day, the kind of crisp blue that made flying feel effortless. The jet was responsive, every switch and lever behaving exactly how it should. It was quiet on the radio, and I was cruising at around 30,000 feet when the first strange thing happened. The cockpit lights flickered. Just a quick blip, like a power surge, but it was enough to make me pause. I checked the gauges. Everything looked normal, fuel, hydraulics, altitude, but then it happened again, longer this time. The entire dashboard blinked out for a few seconds before coming back on. I radioed the base, asking if there were any known issues with the electrical systems. No response. I tried again, switching frequencies, but the line stayed dead. It was unnerving, but I told myself it could have been interference or equipment failure. The jet was experimental, after all. As I adjusted my course, something caught my eye in the distance. It looked like a reflection at first, a glint of light far ahead. I thought maybe it was another aircraft, but there weren't supposed to be any in my area. The object wasn't moving like a plane or a drone. It hovered, completely still, even as I got closer. The flickering in the cockpit started again, worse this time. The jet's engine sputtered briefly, and I could feel the controls becoming sluggish. Panic crept in as I tried to stabilize, but the jet was losing power. I pushed the throttle, but nothing happened. That's when I saw it clearly. The object wasn't metallic like I'd expected. It had this dark, almost translucent surface that seemed to ripple like oil on water. It wasn't solid, but wasn't entirely fluid either. It hovered a few hundred meters ahead, completely silent. I couldn't take my eyes off it. The jet was slowing down, dropping altitude fast. I checked every system, but it was like the power was being sucked out of the aircraft. Even the emergency backup refused to kick in. I pulled the ejection lever out of instinct, but it didn't respond. I was trapped, gliding helplessly toward the object. My breathing was sharp, my hands gripping the controls even though they were useless. As I got closer, the air around the cockpit felt different, heavy, like the pressure was changing. My ears popped and I felt a deep vibration in my chest, not from the jet, but from the object itself. The jet stopped. Just stopped, mid-air, like it had hit an invisible wall. The object moved toward me, slow but deliberate, and then everything went dark. When I came to, I was still in the cockpit, but it wasn't in the sky anymore. The surroundings were black, an empty void that felt endless. My first thought was that I had crashed and was hallucinating, but the jet was upright, completely intact, and I wasn't hurt. Then the light started. It wasn't a normal light. It came from everywhere at once, soft but blinding in a way. Shapes began to form around me, shadows that moved without a clear source. The object from before was above me now, close enough that I could see the strange patterns shifting across its surface. It pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. Suddenly, a low hum filled the cockpit. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but felt in my body. My skin tingled and my chest tightened. The controls lit up briefly before going dark again. The hum grew louder and the jet began to shake. I thought this was it, that whatever this thing was, it was going to crush me or rip the jet apart. But then the shaking stopped. The hum changed, becoming rhythmic, almost like a signal. I realized it was scanning me, not just the jet, but me specifically. The patterns on its surface shifted faster, and I could feel something pulling at me. Not physically, but mentally. It was like it was trying to extract something from my thoughts, pulling memories and images I didn't even realize I was thinking about. I tried to fight it, to block it out, but it was overwhelming. I couldn't tell what it wanted, only that it was taking everything. Then the cockpit filled with light again, so bright that I had to shut my eyes. When I opened them, the void was gone. The jet was back in the sky, engine roaring like nothing had happened. The gauges were normal, the controls responsive, and the radio was active again. I called the base, and this time, they answered. They asked why I had gone off course, why I hadn't responded to their calls. I didn't know what to say. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. I told them I'd had a systems failure and made my way back to base. When I landed, the ground crew swarmed the jet, checking every inch for damage. They didn't find anything, not even a scratch. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt. I've tried to convince myself it was a malfunction, a hallucination, something explainable. But deep down, I know it wasn't. That thing, whatever it was, wasn't from here. And it's still out there, watching. We had just launched from the Cape, a routine deployment mission. Our shuttle was carrying 2 satellites, both designed to improve surveillance capabilities. It was straightforward work. Once we hit the right altitude, we'd release them into orbit and monitor their initial stabilization. Nothing we hadn't done dozens of times before. The first few hours went as expected. The launch was clean, no anomalies. We reached orbit without incident. The Earth a blue and green curve below us. The feeling of weightlessness was familiar now, even comforting. I was busy running diagnostics on the first satellite when the signal came through. At first, I thought it was interference. Space isn't silent like people think. There's always noise in the background. But this wasn't static or a garbled transmission. It was rhythmic, almost musical in a way. The tone repeated, a pattern, and it caught our attention immediately. Captain Reeves was the first to react. He ordered us to triangulate the source while he reported the anomaly back to ground control. The signal wasn't coming from Earth or any known satellite. It was faint but persistent, originating from somewhere just beyond our planned trajectory. Reeves decided to investigate. The shuttle had enough fuel for minor course adjustments, and the mission clock had room to spare. Ground control was hesitant, but didn't object. They wanted answers as much as we did. We adjusted course and followed the signal. As we drew closer, the source became clearer. It was an object, roughly the size of a small aircraft, tumbling slowly through the blackness. It wasn't one of ours, that was obvious. Its surface was dark, almost organic looking, with no visible seams or panels. We got as close as we dared. The object wasn't emitting any heat or showing up on radar. It was just there, hanging in orbit like a dead thing. But the signal was definitely coming from it, pulsing steadily. Reeves decided we needed a closer look. The shuttle wasn't equipped for docking, so we prepared for an EVA. I volunteered to go, along with Martinez, our payload specialist. We suited up, triple-checked everything, and stepped into the airlock. Floating toward the object was surreal. The closer we got, the more alien it looked. Its surface wasn't smooth, but covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift under the light. Martinez reached out to touch it, and that's when everything changed. The object reacted. It lit up, not with lights, but with energy. The patterns on its surface began to move, glowing faintly. A low hum filled the void, vibrating through our suits. The signal we'd been following grew louder, almost deafening. Before we could retreat, the shuttle's systems went haywire. The lights inside flickered, and the engines powered down. Over comms, I could hear the panic in Reeves's voice as he tried to regain control. Martinez and I scrambled to get back, but the object had other plans. A beam of light, if you could call it light, reached out from the object, connecting with the shuttle. It wasn't solid, more like a stream of particles, but it had force. The shuttle was caught in its grip, pulled slowly toward the object. Reeves shouted for us to get inside, but the airlock wouldn't open. The shuttle's systems were completely unresponsive. We clung to the hull, helpless as the object began to pull all of us closer. Inside the shuttle, the lights returned briefly. A strange pattern danced across the walls, like shadows moving where there was no source. I heard a voice, not over the comms, not in my ears, but in my head. It wasn't speaking words, but I understood it. It was asking for help. The realization hit me hard. The object wasn't a weapon or a trap. It was a vessel, damaged and stranded. It had been caught in Earth's gravity, unable to escape. The signal we'd followed was a distress call, but now it was feeding off our systems to sustain itself. Martinez and I managed to force the airlock open manually and get inside. Reeves looked pale, gripping the controls like he could will them back to life. The shuttle was being drained, its power redirected to the object. I don't know what came over me, but I spoke to it, out loud, not knowing if it could hear me. I told it we couldn't survive without power, that we would help if it let us go. The hum softened, almost like it was listening. The shuttle jolted and the beam disconnected. The object drifted away, its glow dimming. Our systems rebooted one by one and the engines roared back to life. Reeves didn't wait for ground control's approval. He fired the thrusters and got us out of there as fast as possible. Back on Earth, we were debriefed for hours. The official report called it an encounter with unknown space debris, but we knew better. The object wasn't debris. It was alive in its own way, and it had been desperate. I still think about that voice, the way it felt in my head. Whatever it was, it didn't mean us harm. It just wanted to survive, and for a moment, we were the only ones who could help it. We were running a standard recon mission, something that wasn't supposed to be more than a few hours in the air. There had been reports of unusual radar signatures over the Bermuda Triangle. Civilian pilots claimed they saw strange lights or experienced sudden equipment failures. Usually that sort of thing turned out to be weather anomalies or malfunctioning instruments, but Command wanted answers, and we were sent to get them. There were 5 of us, each flying our own F-16. Captain Daniels led the squadron. I was second in command. The others, Carter, Lopez, and Singh, were solid pilots, reliable and sharp. We were all joking over comms during the first leg, treating it like just another patrol. The weather was clear, and the sky stretched out endlessly. The ocean below looked calm, almost too calm, like a giant sheet of glass. We were about an hour into the flight when the first anomaly hit. My instruments started acting up, not completely failing, but the altimeter and compass flickered like they couldn't decide on a reading. I glanced around and saw Carter's jet veering slightly to the left, his wing dipping. He came over the comms, saying his controls felt sluggish. "Stay in formation," Daniels ordered, his voice steady. "Switch to manual if you have to." Before anyone could respond, a strange light appeared directly ahead. It wasn't a normal light, not a flare or a reflection. It was bright but diffused, like a glowing mist, pulsing in and out. It didn't seem to have a source. It just hovered there in the air, growing brighter as we approached. Singh was the first to voice what we were all thinking. Is that moving toward us? The light wasn't stationary. It grew larger, spreading across the horizon as if it was swallowing the sky. Our radios cut out completely, replaced by a low hum that vibrated in my skull. My jet's controls locked up entirely, no response from the stick or pedals. I tried to pull back, but it was like the jet was caught in something, being pulled forward against my will. "Eject if you can," Daniels yelled, his voice distorted over the failing comms. I reached for the ejection lever, but before I could pull it, the light enveloped everything. It wasn't blinding, just overwhelming. The world outside the cockpit dissolved, replaced by an endless white void. My stomach churned as if the jet was spinning, though the instruments no longer worked to confirm it. Then it all stopped. When the light faded, I wasn't in the sky anymore. The jet wasn't flying. It was resting on solid ground, or something like ground. My cockpit canopy had gone dark, the controls completely dead. I reached for the emergency release, bracing myself for the worst, and the canopy popped open with a hiss. Cool air rushed in, smelling metallic and unfamiliar. I climbed out and froze. The landscape around me was nothing like Earth. The ground was a dull, grayish green, smooth but uneven, like polished stone. Towering structures rose in the distance, geometric and jagged, glowing faintly with the same pulsing light we'd seen in the sky. The sky itself was a deep, swirling purple, with 2 massive moons hanging low, casting an eerie light over everything. The other jets were nearby, scattered in a rough circle. Daniels was already out of his cockpit, waving us over. One by one, we regrouped, silent and tense. No one knew what to say. Carter kept looking at the sky like he expected it to collapse on us. Singh muttered something about alien abductions, but no one answered him. "Everyone okay?" Daniels asked. We all nodded, though I could tell none of us felt okay. Before we could start assessing the situation, a sound broke the silence. A deep, resonating hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't mechanical. It felt alive, like a heartbeat amplified 1,000 times. We turned toward the source and saw them. They weren't human. That much was obvious. There were 5 of them, roughly our size but elongated, their limbs too long and their movements unnaturally fluid. Their skin was a pale, translucent blue, and their faces were featureless except for faint, glowing lines where eyes and mouths might have been. They didn't walk, they glided, their feet barely touching the ground. We instinctively raised our sidearms, though it felt useless. Daniels held up a hand, signaling us to stand down. The beings stopped a few yards away, observing us. One of them stepped forward, its glowing lines shifting into patterns that seemed almost like symbols. Then I heard a voice, not out loud, but in my head. "Why do you come here?" It wasn't English, not exactly. The words didn't sound like anything, but I understood them. I could see from the others' faces that they heard it too. Daniel stepped forward, lowering his weapon. "We didn't mean to come here," he said, his voice steady. "We were pulled in by the light." The being tilted its head, as if considering his words. "You are not prepared for this place," it said. "Your existence disrupts the balance." "We want to go back," Daniel said firmly. "We mean no harm." The beings exchanged a series of patterns among themselves, their glowing lines pulsing faster. The hum in the air grew louder, making it hard to think. Then the one in front spoke again. Return is possible, but not without cost. You must restore what you have taken. Daniels frowned. What did we take? The being didn't answer directly. Instead, it raised a hand, and the ground beneath us began to shift. A pool of light appeared, swirling with colors that hurt my eyes to look at. Images flickered within it, our jets, the energy they emitted, the disturbance they caused as they passed through the light. I realized then that our presence here had destabilized something. We weren't just intruders. We were a threat. Daniels looked back at us, his face grim. We need to power down the jets, he said. All systems completely off. They're feeding off our energy. We moved quickly, climbing back into the cockpits and shutting down every system. The jets had already been dead, but we made sure nothing was drawing power. When we regrouped, the beings seemed calmer. Their glowing lines softened and the hum faded slightly. You may leave, the leader said, but know this, your world is fragile. Its boundaries are not secure. Take care where you tread. Before we could respond, the light returned, swallowing everything once more. When it faded, we were back in the sky, our jets functional again. The instruments showed we were right where we'd been before the anomaly, as if no time had passed at all. We returned to base in silence, each of us trying to process what had happened. The official report didn't mention aliens or other worlds. It called the incident a spatial anomaly and classified it as top secret. But I know what we saw, what we experienced. I still hear the hum sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet. It's faint, but it's there. And I can't help but wonder if we truly left that place, or if some part of it stayed with us. It started during what was supposed to be a simple war game exercise. We were running maneuvers over open water, simulating dogfights with opposing teams. It wasn't real combat, just training to keep us sharp. 8 of us were in the air that day, split into 2 groups. I was flying with my usual partner, Callahan, and we were part of the red team. The blue team had similar orders: engage, evade, and outmaneuver without firing live rounds. The sky was perfect for it. Clear, no wind, a clean canvas for us to work on. We'd been in the air for about 20 minutes, running through drills, when I noticed something strange on my radar. A new blip appeared. It was faint, irregular, like it wasn't sure if it wanted to be there. Callahan, you see that? I asked over the comms. Yeah, he said. Thought it was a glitch. You think it's one of ours? I don't know, I replied, but I didn't think it was. Everyone accounted for their positions when we did roll call earlier. We weren't expecting any surprises. The blip grew stronger, moving faster than anything I'd seen before. It wasn't heading toward me directly. It was circling, weaving through our formation. I turned my jet slightly, trying to catch sight of it visually, but there was nothing. Just the empty sky. Blue team, are you messing with us? Callahan asked over the radio. There was no response, just static for a moment, then crackling voices saying they weren't seeing anything unusual. That's when it showed itself. Out of nowhere, a jet streaked past me. I say jet, but it wasn't like ours. The shape was wrong. Too sharp, too smooth, like someone had melted it down and sculpted it back together without caring if it looked functional. It had no visible markings, no insignia, and its surface shimmered faintly in the sunlight. It didn't roar like our engines either. It hummed, a low, vibrating sound that made my teeth ache. Contact! We've got an unknown aircraft in the area, I shouted. The comms lit up as everyone else chimed in. The thing darted between us, too fast to track properly, and then 3 more appeared out of nowhere. They moved like they were alive, circling and closing in, always just out of reach. Callahan swore. They're not on radar anymore. They're just gone. I had no idea what to do. This wasn't part of the exercise. We weren't armed for real combat, and even if we were, I wasn't sure our weapons would do anything against these things. Then one of them stopped in front of me. It hovered there, turning slowly like it was examining me. I couldn't see any cockpit, no sign of a pilot, just that smooth, shimmering surface. It tilted slightly, and for a second I thought it was going to ram me. My hands gripped the controls, heart pounding, but it didn't attack. It just stayed there, waiting. The comms crackled again. This time it wasn't static. It was something else, a sound I couldn't describe, a low layered noise, like a machine trying to imitate speech. The alien jet in front of me pulsed with light, its surface rippling like water. What do we do? Callahan's voice was tight with fear. Are we supposed to fight these things? No, I said quickly. We don't even know what they are. The hum grew louder. Another of the alien jets darted toward Callahan, cutting so close I thought it would slice his wing off, but it didn't touch him. It just buzzed past, almost playful. That's when it hit me. They were testing us, just like we tested each other in our war games. Only this wasn't a game for them. They were trying to figure out if we were a threat. They think we're fighting for real, I said. They think this is a battle. What are you talking about? Callahan asked, his voice high and panicked. They're watching us, I said. We need to show them we're not here to fight. It's a drill. They don't know it's not real. How do we do that? Callahan asked. The others were listening too now, their silence on the comms more unnerving than the alien drones circling us. Break formation, I said. Stop chasing them. Fly wide like we're pulling back. No sudden moves. It was a gamble, but what choice did we have? I eased off the throttle, letting my jet drift out of formation. Callahan followed, then the others. The alien jets hesitated, their movements slowing as if they were confused. One of them tilted toward me again, its surface flickering. I kept my hands steady, refusing to engage. The sound on the comms changed. It wasn't static anymore, but a pattern of tones, rising and falling like a melody. It matched the pulsing light on the alien jet in front of me. I didn't understand it, but I felt like it was trying to communicate. We're not enemies, I said out loud, knowing it couldn't hear me. This is just practice. We're not here to hurt you. The hum shifted, softer now, almost calming. The alien jets moved away, circling us from a distance. Then, one by one, they vanished, fading into the sky like they were never there. Did that just happen? Callahan asked after a long silence. Yeah, I said. My hands were still shaking, but I forced myself to keep the jet steady. It happened. We regrouped and returned to base, none of us saying much on the way back. When we landed, the brass was waiting, demanding a debrief. We told them everything, but I could see the disbelief in their eyes. They didn't want to hear it. It didn't matter. We knew what we saw. Those things weren't from here, and they weren't just random machines. They were watching, learning, testing us. And for whatever reason, they decided to let us go. We got the call just after midnight. The higher-ups didn't give us much to go on, just coordinates in the middle of a desert and orders to secure the area. They used the term unidentified object, but the tone suggested more than a routine incident. I was part of a 5-man squadron, experienced enough to know when something wasn't right. The fact that they scrambled us so quickly and emphasized secrecy only confirmed it. The ride out was quiet. Our convoy rolled over uneven terrain, the hum of the engines the only sound cutting through the stillness. The desert stretched endlessly, a flat expanse under a black sky littered with stars. No moon, just the faint glow of the Milky Way above. It felt like we were driving into a void. When we got close to the coordinates, the first thing we noticed was the light. It wasn't natural. A soft bluish-white glow spilled over the horizon, too steady to be fire or anything man-made. It didn't flicker or pulse. It just hung there, casting long, faint shadows across the sand. We stopped a good half-mile from the source, dismounting to approach on foot. The air was colder than it should have been for the desert, and it carried an odd metallic taste. The light grew brighter as we got closer, but it wasn't blinding. It felt almost inviting, though none of us were stupid enough to lower our guard. The glow turned into shapes, structures, as we crested the last dune. What we saw stopped us in our tracks. It was a city, small but unmistakably a city. Buildings rose in strange, angular patterns, their edges sharp and clean. The walls seemed to shimmer, not solid but almost translucent, like they were made of light instead of matter. The entire city pulsed faintly, the glow running through the streets and up the sides of the structures as if the whole thing was alive. "Secure the perimeter," our leader, Sergeant Whitman, ordered. His voice was steady, but I could see his grip on his rifle tighten. We moved cautiously, splitting into pairs to circle the city. As we got closer, the details became clearer. The buildings didn't have windows or doors, just smooth surfaces that reflected the faint light. The streets were empty, perfectly smooth and curved in unnatural ways, looping and twisting like they followed some alien logic. Looks like it's made of energy, Rodriguez, my partner, muttered. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. Then we saw them. Figures moved within the city, dozens of them, maybe more. They weren't human. They had humanoid shapes, sure. 2 arms, 2 legs, but they were taller, thinner, and their heads were elongated, their movements too fluid. Like the buildings, they weren't solid. Their forms shimmered and flickered, as if they were made of the same light as the city. They're not real, I said, though I wasn't sure. Rodriguez nodded, his face pale. We regrouped at the edge of the city. Whitman had us hold position while he radioed for instructions. That's when we realized our comms were dead. The radios didn't even crackle. It was like the entire area was a dead zone. We stick together, Whitman said. No one goes in alone. He didn't have to tell us twice. Whatever this place was, it wasn't normal, and none of us wanted to get separated. We moved as a unit, stepping cautiously into the city. The air felt heavier inside, pressing against my skin like an invisible weight. The streets were silent except for a faint hum, a low vibration that seemed to come from the structures themselves. The figures didn't react to us. They moved with purpose, walking in straight lines or gathering in open spaces, but they didn't acknowledge our presence. It was like we were invisible to them. Then we saw the first image, I guess you'd call it. It appeared on one of the walls as we passed, a 3-dimensional projection that flickered to life like a hologram. It showed a scene from Earth, clear as day, a dense jungle with animals I couldn't name, all moving naturally, like a video. The image shifted, showing other scenes. A massive herd of elephants crossing a plain, a village with straw huts, a market filled with people trading goods. "What the hell is this?" Rodriguez whispered. "It's us," Whitman said, his voice tight. "It's our history." The projections were everywhere. Each building we passed showed a different scene, all of them familiar but strange. Some were ancient, like the pyramids being built, while others were modern, showing cities with skyscrapers and bustling streets. It wasn't just events, though. It was like the city was documenting everything: plants, animals, people, even weather patterns. It was like some kind of library, but not for books, for life. We stopped in the middle of what looked like a square. The projections here were larger, more detailed, showing battles and celebrations, disasters and discoveries. One wall displayed a war, soldiers clashing in brutal combat, their faces twisted in pain. Another showed a family sitting around a fire, their laughter frozen in time. "This isn't just history," Lopez said, breaking the silence. "It's everything." The figures were closer now, moving around us but still ignoring us. Up close, their features were clearer. They had no faces, just smooth surfaces where eyes and mouths should have been. Their bodies were made of the same shifting light as the city, their forms flickering like static on a screen. Then one of them stopped. It turned toward us, its head tilting slightly. The others kept moving, but this one stood still, staring, or at least, I thought it was staring. There were no eyes to confirm it, but I felt its attention like a weight on my chest. Whitman raised his rifle. "Stay back," he warned, though his voice wavered. The figure didn't move. Instead, the hum in the air grew louder, vibrating through my bones. The projections around us flickered, their images distorting. Then, in my head, I heard a voice, not words exactly, but a feeling, an understanding. Observe, learn, preserve. I staggered back, clutching my head. The others reacted the same way, wincing as if they'd been hit by a blast of sound. The figure tilted its head the other way, its light pulsing faster. "We need to leave," Whitman said, his voice sharp. "Now." We backed away, moving quickly but carefully, keeping our eyes on the figures. They didn't follow, but the hum grew louder with each step, almost unbearable. The projections blurred, their images collapsing into static. When we finally crossed the boundary of the city, the hum stopped. The air felt lighter, and the metallic taste was gone. We didn't speak as we made our way back to the convoy, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The city was still there, glowing faintly behind us, but none of us looked back. Whitman tried the radio again, and this time, it worked. We reported what we saw, but I don't think anyone believed us. The official report classified it as an unexplained phenomenon and buried it under layers of bureaucracy. I think about that city sometimes, about what it was doing out there in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't hostile, not really, but it wasn't friendly either. It was just there, watching, recording, preserving, and I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, glowing in the desert, documenting everything we do. It started with a call about a recovery operation. They said a plane had gone down in the Nevada desert, way off from any scheduled flight paths. No flight logs matched it, no transponders, no nothing. I didn't ask questions. It wasn't my job. I was part of a crew stationed at the base, and we dealt with plenty of strange things. Most of it was hush-hush, but this one felt different right from the start. When we got to the hangar where the wreckage was stored, it was already odd. The thing didn't look like anything I'd ever worked on before. I've been around jets my whole career, and I know what's standard and what's experimental. This wasn't either. It was smooth, seamless, and dark gray with a kind of faint shimmer, like oil slicked across metal. No seams, no rivets, no visible bolts or panels. Just a single piece of something. "Where's the cockpit?" one of the guys, Jenkins, muttered. He ran his hand over the surface like he couldn't believe it was real. It doesn't have one, I said, or at least not where it's supposed to be. We were under orders to dismantle it. Higher-ups wanted it stripped down and analyzed. I remember thinking how pointless that was. How do you take apart something that doesn't even look like it was put together in the first place? But orders were orders. The first weird thing happened when we tried to cut into it. We had plasma torches, saws, the works, but nothing touched it. The metal, or whatever it was, didn't heat up, didn't spark, didn't scratch. It was like trying to cut water with a knife. We finally found an edge, a spot where two parts of the thing overlapped. It looked almost like a wing folded in, but it wasn't like any wing I'd ever seen. We pried it open with hydraulics, and that's when I got my first good look at the inside. The insides weren't mechanical, not like an engine or wiring or hydraulics. It was organic looking, like muscles and tendons made of metal and light. Everything glowed faintly, pulsing in patterns that made no sense. It didn't smell like oil or fuel either, but something sharp and electric, like the air before a thunderstorm. "Are you seeing this?" Jenkins said, his voice shaky. "Yeah," I said, though I wished I wasn't. It didn't look right. It didn't feel right either, standing that close to it. The air was heavier somehow, like it was pressing down on me. We kept working, though I couldn't tell you why. Maybe it was the chain of command, or maybe we were just too stubborn to back down. We started removing pieces, little by little. They came loose easier than I expected, like the thing was letting us take them off. That should have been the second red flag, but we were too focused to think about it. It wasn't until the third day that it happened. Jenkins and I were the only ones in the hangar late that night. We'd stripped away most of the outer layer and exposed what looked like its core. It was this glowing sphere, pulsing with light that changed colors in slow waves. It was beautiful in a way, but also wrong. It felt alive. I was about to suggest we call it a night when Jenkins screamed. I spun around and saw him holding his hand, blood dripping between his fingers. "It cut me," he said, backing away from the thing. "How?" I asked. "Nothing here is sharp." He didn't answer, just stared at the craft. I looked closer and saw that one of the pieces we'd removed earlier was back where it had been before, like it had reattached itself. "That wasn't there a second ago," I said, my throat dry. Jenkins nodded. "I know." We stepped back, watching as the pieces we'd taken off started moving. They didn't float or fly. They crawled, like insects, clicking and snapping back into place. "What the hell is it doing?" Jenkins whispered. I didn't answer because I didn't know. The pieces kept moving, faster now, reassembling themselves. The glowing core pulsed brighter, and the air got heavier. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the room was closing in around me. "Shut it down," Jenkins shouted. "But how do you shut down something you don't understand?" I grabbed a crowbar and swung it at the core. The metal didn't even touch it. It stopped mid-air, like it had hit an invisible wall. The force knocked me backward, and I hit the ground hard. The craft was almost whole again. The wings snapped into place with a sound like thunder, and the glow from the core spread out across its surface. The air hummed, vibrating through my bones. "We need to get out of here," I said, pulling Jenkins toward the door. "What about?" "Forget it," I shouted. "We're not stopping that thing." We ran, stumbling out of the hangar just as the craft rose into the air. It didn't need a runway or a launch pad. It just floated, silent and menacing, before shooting straight up into the sky. The base went into lockdown after that. They questioned us for hours, but I don't think they believed a word we said. The official report claimed the craft was destroyed in an accident, but I know that's a lie. It wasn't a jet. It wasn't anything we could understand. And whatever it was, it's still out there, somewhere. I was flying a routine test mission that day. Nothing I hadn't done before. The jet I was piloting was a new stealth model, cutting-edge stuff, the kind of plane they keep in underground hangars and only bring out when they're sure no one's watching. I'd been training in it for months, so I knew its capabilities inside and out, or at least I thought I did. We were up at 40,000 feet, somewhere over the Nevada desert. The skies were clear, visibility perfect. I'd done a dozen runs like this before, testing the jet's evasive maneuvers, pushing its limits. It was supposed to be uneventful, just data gathering for the engineers back on the ground. That changed when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a shadow, maybe a trick of the light. Trick of the light. But shadows don't hover. It was off my left wing, just a dark shape, smooth and featureless. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a car, but it didn't look like any drone or plane I'd ever seen. There were no lights, no markings, nothing. I called it in. "Control, this is Alpha 2. I've got a visual on an unidentified object, bearing 270, 500 yards. There was a pause before the reply. "Alpha 2, say again?" "It's a bogey, Control. It's matching my altitude and speed. No response to signals." "Copy that, Alpha 2. Maintain visual and stand by for instructions." I kept my eyes on it, expecting it to veer off or accelerate, but it didn't. It just hovered there, almost casual, like it was studying me. That's when my radar went haywire. The display lit up with alerts, but none of it made sense. The system couldn't lock onto the thing. It wasn't there, according to the instruments. Then it moved. It was fast, faster than anything I'd ever seen. 1 second it was off my wing, and the next it was directly in front of me, blocking my flight path. I pulled up hard, banking left, trying to avoid a collision. My stomach lurched as the G-forces kicked in, but the thing was still there, perfectly aligned with my nose. I rolled right, diving to lose it. The jet systems screamed warnings at me, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get away from it. But no matter what I did, it stayed right in front of me, mirroring my every move. It wasn't following me, it was predicting me. Every turn, every roll, every dive, it was already there, waiting. It didn't just react. It anticipated. I felt like a mouse in a trap, every escape route blocked before I could take it. "Control, I've got no evasion options," I shouted. "This thing's on me like glue." "Alpha 2, disengage and return to base." "Disengage how?" I snapped. "It knows what I'm doing before I do." I could hear the panic in my own voice. Pilots don't panic. We're trained not to. But this was different, human. I started improvising, throwing the jet into moves that didn't make sense. Zigzag patterns, random flips, anything to break its rhythm. The jet groaned under the strain, the frame pushed to its limits. Sweat dripped down my face, and my hands ached from gripping the controls so tightly. It worked. For a split second, I lost it. The shadow vanished from my view. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. A second later, it reappeared above me, perfectly aligned, as if mocking my efforts. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a chase. It could have taken me down at any moment if it wanted to. It was testing me, just like I'd been testing the jet. I was the subject of an experiment, and I didn't like where it was heading. I tried to call control again, but my comms were dead. Every system was. No radar, no navigation, not even basic altitude readings. The cockpit lights flickered, and the engine whined like it was under some kind of strain I couldn't identify. The object pulsed then, a ripple of light running across its surface. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It shimmered, almost translucent, like it was made of liquid glass. I felt a pressure in my head, like a low hum that wasn't a sound but something deeper. It made my teeth ache. I don't know what came over me, but I started talking to it, out loud. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was instinct, but I spoke. I don't know what you want, I said, but I'm not your enemy. The hum stopped. Just like that, just the pressure in my head vanished and the object moved again, slower this time. It circled me, almost lazily, before pulling ahead and stopping dead in my path. It hung there for a moment, then shot straight up, disappearing into the sky faster than I could blink. My systems came back online all at once, the sudden flood of lights and sounds almost overwhelming. Control was shouting in my ear, asking for my status, but I didn't answer right away. I was too busy staring at the empty sky where the object had been. I made it back to base somehow. They debriefed me for hours, asking the same questions over and over. What did it look like? How did it move? Did it attack? I told them everything, but I could tell they didn't believe half of it. They chalked it up to equipment failure and pilot error. But I know what I saw. That thing wasn't human. It wasn't from here. And whatever it was smarter than me, faster than me, yet better than anything we've ever put in the sky. I still fly, but I keep one eye on the horizon now. I don't think it's coming back for me, but if it does, I don't know if I'll be lucky enough to outfly it again. And I was just supposed to be a normal patrol flight, nothing out of the ordinary. We'd done this route so many times, the sky above the ocean had become second nature. The four of us in the squadron had clear skies, steady winds, and an open horizon. Perfect conditions for a routine check. Or at least, that's what it started out as. We were about an hour out from the base, altitude steady at 20,000 feet, when I noticed something strange out of the corner of my eye. A darker patch in the sky, almost like a shadow, but not quite. It didn't make sense. There weren't any clouds thick enough nearby to cast anything like that. I thought maybe I was imagining it. "Do you see that?" I asked over the comms. "See what?" One of the others, Ramirez, replied. 9 o'clock, about a mile out, I said. "Looks like something's forming." "Could be a storm rolling in," Davis chimed in, his voice calm like always. He'd been flying longer than the rest of us and rarely got rattled. "Stay sharp, though." The shadow started spreading, almost like ink seeping into water. It wasn't a storm cloud, too smooth, too deliberate, and then the shapes began to appear. At first, they were just lines, straight and sharp, intersecting at strange angles. Then curves and spirals joined in, growing clearer and more intricate. It was like someone was drawing in the sky. "Okay, that's not a storm," Ramirez said, his voice tighter now. "No kidding," I muttered. The lines weren't random. They were forming patterns, symbols, big enough to dwarf our jets stretching across the horizon. And they were glowing, faint but unmistakable, like sunlight catching oil on water. "What the hell is this?" said Morales, the youngest of us. He was newer to the squadron, and I could hear the edge of panic in his voice. "Keep it together," Davis said firmly. "Maintain formation. Don't engage unless there's an immediate threat." We held our positions, flying closer to the symbols. As we approached, the glow became more vivid, almost pulsing, like it was alive. My instruments started going haywire, altimeter flickering, compass spinning. The radio was full of static now, the comms cutting in and out. "I'm losing systems," Ramirez shouted. "Controls are sluggish. Anyone else?" I tried to steady my own jet, but it felt like I was fighting against an invisible current, something pulling me toward the symbols. They were massive now, taking up the entire sky in front of us. And then, as if they'd reached completion, they stopped shifting. It wasn't random, it was a message. It had to be. The lines and curves were too precise, too deliberate, like writing, but not in any language I'd ever seen. It wasn't human, that much was clear. "What's it doing?" Morales said. "What does it mean?" "How the hell are we supposed to know?" Ramirez snapped, his voice cracking. "Both of you, focus," Davis barked. "Whatever this is, we're not going to figure it out panicking." The glow intensified, so bright now it was hard to look directly at the symbols. And then, without warning, the air around us seemed to vibrate. Not a sound exactly, but a hum we could feel in our bones. My teeth ached, and the pressure in my head was almost unbearable. And then came the flashes. quick, like a strobe light, but each one brought something with it. Images. Not like seeing them with my eyes, but in my mind. Faces, places, landscapes I didn't recognize. Alien, for lack of a better word. Tall spires reaching into a pale sky, creatures with elongated forms and shimmering skin. A planet, green and blue, but not Earth. And then destruction. Explosions, fire, shadows blotting out the sky. The images came faster, harder, like they were being forced into my head. I couldn't make sense of most of it, but one thing was clear. Whoever was sending this message, they were in trouble. "Are you seeing this?" Morales asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We all are," Davis said grimly. It's communication." "They're asking for help," I said, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. "They're showing us what happened to them." "Help? How? We can't even talk to them," Ramirez said. As if in response, the symbols began shifting again, rearranging themselves into new patterns. This time, they were simpler, clearer. A single glowing line pointed downward toward the ocean below. "They want us to follow," Davis said. "Are you serious? We don't even know what this is," Ramirez said. "Do you have a better idea?" Davis snapped. "Because sitting here isn't an option." Reluctantly, we descended, the symbols guiding us. The glow in the sky faded as we got closer to the water, replaced by a faint, bluish light emanating from the waves. And then we saw it. A massive structure just beneath the surface. It looked organic, almost like coral, but larger than any building I'd ever seen. Parts of it glowed with the same light as the symbols, pulsing faintly. As we circled, the hum returned, softer this time, almost comforting. The images in my mind shifted again, showing the structure, the symbols, and then us. Our jets. "They want us to mark this location," Davis said. "They're using us to relay this to someone." "To who?" Ramirez asked. "I don't know," Davis said, "but they're not hostile. If they were, we wouldn't still be alive." We circled the structure one last time before climbing back to altitude. The symbols in the sky were gone now, the horizon clear. My instruments returned to normal, and the comms crackled back to life. "Control, this is Alpha 1. Do you copy?" Davis said. "Alpha 1, we read you," came the reply. "Report status." We exchanged glances, none of us sure how much to say. "Encountered an unidentified phenomenon," Davis said carefully. "Coordinates to follow." Control pressed for more details, but Davis kept it vague, saying we'd explain upon return. When we landed, the debrief was intense, the higher-ups grilling us for every detail. I could tell they didn't know what to make of our story, but they couldn't ignore the data from our jets or the strange marks now appearing on satellite scans of the area. We don't know what we stumbled onto out there, but I think about it every time I fly. Whoever they were, wherever they came from, they trusted us to help. And I can't shake the feeling they'll be back, one way or another. I was part of a 3-plane patrol that night, flying over the northern plains under a sky full of stars. It was the kind of night pilots love. Clear air, no turbulence, and the horizon stretched out endlessly. The mission was straightforward, just routine surveillance. Nothing ever happened on these runs, and I wasn't expecting this one to be any different. We were cruising at 30,000 feet, spread out in a loose V formation. It was quiet except for the hum of the engines and the occasional chatter over the radio. I remember glancing at my instruments, everything reading normal. That's when it started. At first, I thought it was interference, just a low hum bleeding into my headset. It was faint, almost like the static you'd get if the comms weren't tuned right. But then it shifted. The sound wasn't random. It had a pattern, a rhythm, like a melody, but not one I'd ever heard before. It wasn't human. "Tower, this is Echo 1, I said, checking in. "I'm picking up a strange signal. Is there a weather anomaly in the area?" The response was garbled, just static. The signal had drowned them out. "Echo 1, come again?" Ramirez, flying to my left, called over the squad comms. "You're cutting out." "Same here," Morales added from the right. "Signal's breaking up." Before I could reply, the sound changed. It was clearer now, no longer just a hum. It had depth, layers, instruments that didn't exist, voices that weren't voices, weaving together into something too perfect to be natural. It filled my headset, pushing everything else aside. I could still hear the others talking, but it was distant, like they were behind a wall. The music wasn't just sound. It was something else. It pulled at me, tugging at memories, feelings, things I couldn't even name. I had this overwhelming urge to follow it. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Ramirez was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, I hear it." Morales cut in, his voice tighter. "What is that? Is it music?" None of us could explain it, but we all felt it. The melody seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, as if the air itself was singing. It wasn't just in our headsets, it was in the space around us, vibrating in our bones. And then I saw it. A glimmer, just ahead and below us like moonlight on water. It was faint, but it moved, shimmering in the darkness. "There's something out there," I said, leaning forward against my restraints. 9 o'clock, low. "Do you see it?" "Got it," Ramirez replied. "What the hell is that?" We turned toward it, breaking formation slightly. As we got closer, the glimmer grew brighter, more defined. It wasn't a reflection. It was a craft, unlike anything I'd ever seen. It had no sharp edges, no seams. It was smooth, almost organic, with a faint, silvery glow that seemed to pulse in time with the music. "I don't like this," Morales said. "We should report back." "Radio's useless," Ramirez pointed out. "We can't call it in." "Stay calm," I said, trying to keep my own nerves in check. "Let's get closer, but stay spread out." As we approached, the craft shifted, turning toward us. It didn't have lights like a plane, but its surface rippled, reflecting the stars in a way that made it hard to tell where it ended and the sky began. The music grew louder, more complex, wrapping around us like a physical presence. And then it happened. My jet slowed, not because I pulled back, but because something else was doing it. The controls felt sluggish, like I was flying through syrup. "Controls are heavy," Ramirez said. "Anyone else?" "Same here," Morales replied. His voice was shaking now. The craft began to ascend, moving gracefully, almost inviting us to follow. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to. It wasn't like the music was forcing me exactly, but it made the idea of turning away unthinkable. We climbed after it, the three of us, our jets struggling as if the air itself was resisting. The craft led us higher, past 40,000 feet, then 50,000. The stars seemed brighter, closer. My oxygen gauge flickered, and I realized how thin the air was getting. "We can't keep this up," Morales said. "We're going to stall out." The music shifted again, softer now, almost pleading. The craft stopped its climb, hovering in place. We leveled off, circling it at a cautious distance. "It's waiting for us," Ramirez said. "Waiting for what?" I asked. Before anyone could answer, the music surged, filling my head with images. Not pictures exactly, but impressions, shapes, colors, emotions. A sense of distance, of loneliness, of searching. They weren't words, but they were clear. This thing, whatever it was trying to communicate. "It's not hostile," I said, more to myself than anyone else. "How do you know that?" Morales asked. "I just do," I said. "It's asking for something." The craft pulsed, its glow intensifying. The music shifted again, more urgent. Another wave of images flooded my mind. Earth from above, storms rolling across oceans, cities lighting up the night, and then darkness, silence. It was showing us what would happen if something wasn't done. "We need to respond," Ramirez said. "How?" Morales asked. "We don't even know what it wants." I didn't have an answer. None of us did. But I couldn't shake the feeling that turning away now would be wrong. I reached for the manual beacon override, a small device we used in emergencies to send out a distress signal. I activated it, broadcasting an unencrypted pulse. It was primitive, but it was all I could think to do. The craft reacted immediately. Its glow brightened, and the music swelled, almost joyful. It began to ascend again, faster this time, pulling away from us. Within seconds, it was gone, disappearing into the stars. The music faded with it, leaving only the hum of our engines and the vast, empty sky. "What just happened?" Morales asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think we answered," I said. We returned to base in silence, none of us sure how to explain what we'd seen. The debrief was tense, the higher-ups skeptical, but the flight data backed us up. Whatever we'd encountered, it wasn't a malfunction or a trick of the mind. To this day, I don't know what it was or why it reached out to us. But I can't forget the music or the sense that somehow we made a connection. Whatever it wasn't trying to hurt us. It was trying to reach us. It started during what was supposed to be an easy flight. I was alone, doing a routine patrol over a mostly uninhabited stretch of coastline. The kind of flight you could do blindfolded after a few years. The weather forecast had called for clear skies, but a bank of clouds had rolled in unexpectedly. Big, heavy ones. I didn't think much of it. You fly through worse. I entered the cloud around 10,000 feet. It was thick, so thick it felt like flying through a wall. I couldn't see the wings of my own aircraft. My instruments worked fine, but there was this strange static in my headset. Faint, but there. I assumed it was interference from the moisture or the plane's electronics. Clouds do that sometimes. About halfway through, the static changed. It wasn't random anymore. It sounded rhythmic, almost like clicking. I remember sitting there, gripping the controls tighter, trying to figure out if it was mechanical or natural. Before I could work it out, I broke through the other side of the cloud. The sun hit me like a spotlight, and everything seemed normal again. I took a breath and glanced over the controls. Everything seemed fine. I checked my wings instinctively, a habit after flying through weather like that. That's when I saw it. It was attached to the right wing, near the tip. At first, I thought it was some sort of debris, maybe a loose flap of fabric from a weather balloon or a torn-up piece of plastic. But it wasn't moving like something caught in the wind. It clung to the wing with long, translucent tendrils that wrapped around the edge like fingers. The main body was almost transparent, but there were faint blue and purple veins running through it, pulsing slowly like it was alive. It reminded me of a jellyfish. I tried to shake it off. I dipped the wing, jerked the stick back and forth, even climbed a few thousand feet to see if the change in pressure would do anything. It didn't move. It just held on, its tendrils tightening slightly as if it knew what I was doing. My heart was pounding now. I called back to base. Control, this is Echo 1. I've got something on my wing. Unidentified. It's biological. Requesting instructions. There was static on the line, but I heard enough to know they didn't understand. Repeat, Echo 1. You're breaking up. Say again. I tried to explain again, but the static got worse. It wasn't normal interference. It had that same rhythmic clicking pattern I'd heard in the cloud. I shut off my radio, figuring it was useless for now, and focused on the thing. It started to move. Slowly, but it was definitely moving. The body rippled like it was breathing. The tendrils unwrapped slightly, reaching out along the wing. I thought about climbing higher, hoping the cold would kill it. But the idea of going any further up with this thing on my plane didn't sit right with me. I started a slow descent, hoping to get back to base as quickly as possible. That's when my instruments went haywire. The altimeter spun wildly, the compass needle jerked back and forth, and the speed gauge flatlined. I lost all sense of where I was. Even my backup systems were useless. The static in my headset got louder, drowning out everything else. It wasn't just clicks anymore. There was something deeper in the sound, like a low hum or a growl. Then I saw it. A light far off in the distance, just barely visible against the bright sky. It was pulsing, the same rhythm as the thing's veins. At first, I thought it was another aircraft, but it didn't move like one. It was too steady, too deliberate. It was coming toward me. The thing on my wing pulsed faster, its tendrils stretching out even further. They glowed faintly now, the same blue and purple as the veins in its body. It wasn't just a parasite, it was a beacon. The light in the distance grew brighter, closer. I could make out its shape now, a massive oval craft, black and smooth like obsidian. It moved silently, defying every law of aerodynamics I'd ever learned. I panicked. I slammed the throttle forward, trying to push my plane to its limits. The thing on my wing tightened its grip, almost like it was holding on for dear life. The clicking in my headset turned into a screech, high-pitched and unbearable. I ripped the headset off and threw it to the side. The craft was right behind me now, filling up my rearview mirrors. It didn't fire any weapons or make any threatening moves. It just followed, matching my every maneuver with ease. It was toying with me or studying me. I knew I couldn't outrun it. My only chance was to deal with the thing on my wing. I remembered the emergency flares. They weren't much, but they burned hot. I popped the canopy slightly, just enough to release a flare. The wind tore at my face, deafening and freezing, but I managed to angle the flare launcher toward the wing. I fired. The flare shot out, a bright, angry streak of red. It hit the edge of the wing, right near the thing's body. The reaction was immediate. The jellyfish-like creature let out a flash of blinding light, its veins flaring white-hot. It released its grip on the wing, the tendrils retracting quickly. It drifted off into the air, hovering for a moment before falling away. The pulsing stopped, and so did the clicking in my headset. My instruments snapped back to life, the dials stabilizing as if nothing had happened. The craft behind me slowed, then stopped. It hovered for a moment, as if deciding what to do. Then it turned, disappearing into the horizon in a blink. I didn't stick around to see if it would come back. I dove straight for the base, radioing in as soon as I was close enough for the signal to get through. I didn't bother trying to explain the whole story over the air. When I landed, the mechanics found scorch marks on the wing where the thing had been. No other damage, no sign of the creature. I still don't know what it was or why it was there, but I know it wasn't random. It was waiting for something or someone, and whatever it was signaling to, it's still out there. We were flying a standard cargo route, nothing unusual. Just another night in the air, hauling equipment to the base. There were 3 of us on board. Me, the pilot, Anders, the co-pilot, and Davis, the loadmaster. The hold was packed tight with crates, mostly spare parts and some sealed containers we didn't ask too much about. Military jobs usually came with the unspoken rule of not prying. The flight had been smooth, a straight shot over the ocean. Weather was clear, instruments were good, and we'd been cruising at altitude for hours. It was quiet except for the hum of the engines. Anders had just started a story about his old training days when Davis called over the intercom from the back. "You guys hear that?" he said. "Hear what?" I asked. "Thought I heard something moving back here," he said. "Probably nothing. Could be the pressure messing with me." "Double check the straps," Anders said. "Last thing we need is a loose crate sliding around." We didn't think much of it, but a few minutes later, Davis called again, this time sounding less casual. "I'm telling you, there's something moving back here. I'm checking it out." I glanced at Anders. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. It wasn't unheard of for stuff to shift during flights, but Davis wasn't the jumpy type. We waited for him to check in, but 5 minutes went by, then 10. Nothing. "Davis, you good back there?" I asked over the intercom. No response. I put the plane on autopilot and motioned for Anders to stay put. "Keep an eye on things up here. I'll see what's going on." The cargo hold was dimly lit, the overhead lights giving off a cold, pale glow. The air felt different back there, heavier, like the space was pressing down on me. I moved slowly between the rows of crates, calling Davis's name. No answer. About halfway down the hold, I saw his flashlight lying on the floor. The beam was still on, pointing at nothing. My chest tightened. I bent to pick it up, and that's when I heard it. A faint, wet sound, like something sticky being peeled off a surface. It came from behind one of the larger containers, the kind that's bolted down. I shone the flashlight toward the noise, and for a second I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Something moved, quick and fluid, like a shadow but solid. It slipped out of the light before I could focus on it. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to move closer. I turned the corner, and that's when I saw Davis. He was on the floor, slumped against the container. His eyes were open, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring past me, his face pale and frozen in an expression I can only describe as terror. I dropped to my knees and shook him, but he didn't respond. He wasn't dead. He was breathing, shallow and fast, but it was like he was locked inside himself. Then I heard it again, the wet, peeling noise. It was closer now, almost behind me. I turned, shining the flashlight wildly, and there it was. It was crouched low, half hidden in the shadows. Its body was slick and dark, almost like oil, and it shimmered faintly in the light. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a dog, but its shape was wrong, all sharp angles and smooth curves that didn't make sense together. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were 2 glowing slits, bright and unblinking. It didn't move right away. It just stared at me, like it was waiting to see what I'd do. I couldn't look away. My legs felt like they were made of lead, my brain screaming at me to run, but my body refusing to listen. Then it made a sound, a low, vibrating hum that I felt in my chest more than I heard. The lights flickered, and I realized the hum wasn't just noise. It was doing something, affecting the plane somehow. I don't know how I found the strength, but I managed to stand and back away slowly, keeping the flashlight on it. It didn't follow me. It just stayed there, watching. When I got to the intercom, I grabbed it and shouted, "Anders, get back here now!" He didn't argue. A minute later, he appeared at the edge of the hold, his face going pale when he saw Davis and the thing. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. "I don't know," I said, "but it's not from here." We didn't have time to figure out what to do. The hum got louder and the plane started to shudder. Alarms went off in the cockpit. Something was messing with the electronics. Anders ran back to try and stabilize us, leaving me alone with it. It started to move then, slowly unfolding itself like it had been cramped up for too long. Its body shifted and stretched, almost like it was trying to decide what shape to take. It didn't come toward me, though. It turned its attention to one of the sealed containers. It approached it cautiously, its tendrils or arms or whatever they were, reaching out and brushing the surface. That's when I understood. It wasn't just hiding in the cargo hold. It was running from something, and whatever it was looking for was inside that container. The plane jolted violently, knocking me off my feet. The thing froze, its glowing slits narrowing. I scrambled back, shouting for Anders, but he didn't answer. The alarms were louder now, the plane struggling to stay in the air. The creature turned back to me, and for a moment I thought it was going to attack, but instead it backed away, retreating into the shadows. The hum stopped and the plane steadied. Anders finally managed to regain control, and we made an emergency landing at the nearest base. When the crew came to inspect the cargo hold, the creature was gone. Davis was alive but unresponsive, and the sealed container had been opened. Whatever had been inside was missing. The military took over from there. They didn't tell us much, just that we weren't to speak of it. Davis recovered eventually, but he never talked about what he saw. I still don't know what that thing was or what it wanted, but I know this much. It wasn't here by accident. It was running from something, and whatever it was running from, it's still out there. It was 1962, during the height of the Cold War, when I found myself flying out of Ramstein Air Base. I was part of a 4-man squadron running reconnaissance missions over Europe. We were the eyes and ears of the Air Force, always on the lookout for anything unusual. Back then, tensions were so high you could feel them in the air, like static before a storm. We were on a routine patrol over West Germany, skimming along the edge of Soviet airspace. The plan was simple. Fly a loop, monitor radio frequencies, and gather intel. The weather was clear, the kind of cold, crisp night where the stars felt closer than the ground below. Everything was going as planned until we received a scrambled order to redirect. "Vector east towards Sector 402, the voice said. No explanation, just coordinates. That wasn't unusual either. Orders came down the chain, and we followed them. We adjusted course, climbing higher to avoid radar. As we neared the new sector, I noticed a strange blip on my radar. It wasn't moving like a plane or a bird. It would dart, stop, then dart again, always staying just outside of what we could pinpoint. "Anyone else seeing this?" I radioed to the others. "Yeah," came a reply from Captain Harris, our squadron leader. "Could be a glitch." But it didn't feel like a glitch. It felt deliberate. We stayed in formation, scanning the skies and our instruments. About 5 minutes later, I spotted it with my own eyes. It was off our starboard side, maybe a mile out, glowing faintly in the dark. It wasn't a plane, that much was obvious. It was too round, like a flattened sphere, and it didn't have any lights, just a soft, shifting glow, like it was alive. "What in God's name is that?" Harris muttered over the radio. We didn't get much time to speculate. The object suddenly zipped toward us, closing the distance in a blink. It stopped so abruptly it defied every law of physics I knew. It hovered there, just off Harris's wing, perfectly silent and steady. "Do not engage," Harris ordered, his voice tight. "Hold formation." But then it moved again, almost playfully, circling our planes. It passed so close to me that I could see its surface, a smooth, seamless silver that reflected the moonlight like liquid mercury. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Harris tried to communicate with it. He flashed his lights in a pattern, slow and steady, but it didn't respond. Instead, it shot straight up, disappearing into the night. We thought it was gone, but then it came back, this time directly in front of us. "Break formation! Scatter!" Harris barked. We split off, each of us diving and climbing in different directions. The object didn't chase one of us, it chased all of us. It would dart from one plane to another faster than anything I'd ever seen, like it was studying us. Then my instruments went haywire. My altimeter spun wildly, the radio filled with static, and the stick in my hand felt sluggish, like I was fighting against something. I wasn't the only one. "I've lost control," one of the others shouted. "It's messing with the plane." My heart was in my throat. I thought for sure I was going to crash, but then everything just stopped. The object pulled back, hovering in the distance as if it had lost interest. "What now?" I asked, my voice shaking. "We stay put," Harris said. "Let it make the next move." It did. The glow around it intensified, and then it emitted a bright flash. I thought I was blind for a second, but when my vision cleared, the thing was gone. Just like that, it had vanished without a trace. We regrouped and returned to base in silence. None of us knew what to say. When we landed, we were immediately debriefed by a group of men I'd never seen before. They weren't Air Force, that much was clear. They took our flight logs, confiscated our helmets, and told us to forget what we saw. "National security," one of them said. "This incident did not happen." Harris argued with them, but it didn't matter. The next day, we were reassigned to separate squadrons. The official report said we encountered an unregistered Soviet aircraft, but I know what I saw. That wasn't anything made on this planet. To this day, I can't look up at the night sky without feeling like I'm being watched. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't human. And whoever covered it up knew a lot more than they were letting on. It was a late afternoon when the first signs of something strange began. I was stationed at a classified airbase in the middle of nowhere, miles away from the nearest city. The place was a black hole of secrecy. If you worked there, you didn't ask too many questions. You followed orders and kept your head down. I had been part of the security detail for months, overseeing routine drills and acting as a liaison for higher-ups whenever they needed things done quickly. That afternoon, we were doing a standard patrol along the perimeter when a low hum filled the air. At first, I thought it was just a helicopter or one of our own planes. But the sound didn't fade, and it didn't have the usual thrum of aircraft engines. It was constant, like an electric hum that seemed to pulse through the ground and into your chest. I remember looking up, expecting to see a plane cutting through the clouds. What I saw instead made my stomach drop. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, some optical illusion, but then it got closer. A strange metallic craft, low enough to make the hum deafening, was descending. It wasn't anything I had ever seen before. It wasn't a plane, not even close. The shape was wrong, angular but smooth, almost organic, like something out of science fiction. It wasn't like the UFOs you hear about in stories, no saucers or flying discs. This thing looked like it didn't belong, like it was made by hands that didn't belong to humans. The base immediately went on high alert. Sirens blared and officers scrambled to their posts, but it was too late. The craft hit the ground with a heavy thud, skidding along the desert floor for 100 yards before coming to a stop. I was still frozen in place, not sure if I was dreaming or if this was some kind of elaborate hoax. I had never seen anything like it before in my life. Within minutes, our military personnel surrounded the crash site. The first thing they did was secure the perimeter and start setting up a quarantine zone. I had a bad feeling about it, but I couldn't do anything but follow orders. We all had to stay out of the way while the higher-ups worked out what to do. That's when I saw it. Movement. A small figure emerging from the wreckage. At first I thought it was a person, someone who had survived the crash. But it wasn't a person. It was something else. It stood, maybe 4 feet tall, with skin that was too smooth and too pale, almost translucent. Its eyes were dark, black, and endless. Its limbs were thin, and it moved with an unsettling grace, like it was gliding more than walking. I don't know how long I stood there, unable to move. The officers around me had the same look on their faces: shock, confusion, and, if I'm being honest, fear. The creature, if that's what it was, didn't seem hostile. It didn't charge at us or make any threatening moves. But the moment it saw us, it stopped, tilting its head, studying us like we were the strange ones. Then the orders came. We were to detain it. No one knew exactly what that meant, but we all understood it had to be done. The higher-ups started shouting commands into their radios, and before long, men in hazmat suits moved in to secure the being. They didn't touch it right away. They kept their distance, using equipment I hadn't seen before, long, thin rods that emitted some sort of light and energy field, like they were trying to corral the creature without getting too close. It didn't resist. It didn't seem scared. It just stood there, watching, calm as could be, while they restrained it. At that moment, I realized how out of our depth we were. This was bigger than any operation I had ever been involved with. The creature was placed in a containment unit, and we were told to maintain security. For the next several hours, no one was allowed to approach the crash site, except for a few of the senior officers who seemed to know exactly what to do. I wasn't privy to the details. I didn't know the full scope of what had happened or what the plans were, but it was clear that no one was going to speak about it openly. That night, the airbase became a hub of activity. A dozen high-ranking officers arrived from various agencies. Some of them I recognized, others I didn't. Everyone was on edge. The creature was kept in a secure room, and we were told that our primary job was to keep anyone from getting close. As far as we knew, the alien, if it was one, was being detained for its safety and ours. But the longer the being was held, the stranger things got. We began to hear reports from the scientists and researchers who were working with it. They claimed the creature was trying to communicate, but not in any language we understood. It was as though it was sending signals, thoughts, emotions, impressions, rather than words. Some of the officers thought it was a kind of psychological warfare, an attempt to confuse or disorient us, but others believed it was simply trying to reach out, maybe asking for help. I was pulled into a meeting with the commanding officer, Colonel Morgan. He looked like a man who had seen too much, his face drawn and serious as he spoke. "We need to figure out what we're dealing with," he said, his voice low. "This thing has information. It knows something." We were all told to maintain radio silence, to avoid contact with outside agencies or the public. I'm not sure what they were hoping to achieve by that. Maybe they didn't want panic to set in. Over the next few days, it became clear that whatever this creature was, it wasn't alone. We started hearing rumors that something was coming for it. Higher-ups were tight-lipped, but whispers spread. I overheard a conversation between two men in the break room. They were talking about the possibility of an interstellar war or conflict. They spoke of pursuers, entities that had tracked the creature here to Earth. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But the thought of something else, something far worse than the creature in the containment unit, made my skin crawl. As the days passed, I started noticing the subtle changes, tensions building among the personnel. Guards were more on edge. The lights in the containment room flickered at odd times. Sometimes you'd hear noises coming from within, a tapping or scraping sound, like the being was trying to break free. The atmosphere on the base became suffocating, like everyone knew something was wrong but didn't know how to handle it. Then, one day, without warning, everything changed. The alien, it must have been desperate, used its strange form of communication to influence the minds of the guards. I don't know how it happened, but in the blink of an eye, the security detail in the room was incapacitated. Some of the men began to scream, others stood motionless, staring into the empty space like they were in a trance. I don't know if it was intentional or if it was some kind of accident, but the creature escaped. It didn't take long for the pursuit to start. I don't know how they tracked it, but within hours, the base was under lockdown. Helicopters flew overhead, search parties were deployed, and every single man on that base was ordered to find the alien, dead or alive. We didn't get a lot of details, but we all understood the gravity of the situation. If this creature wasn't found, the consequences would be unimaginable. By the time the search ended, the base was quiet again. The creature was never found. Some said it had left. Others whispered it had been taken back. No one really knew. All I know is that when the whole thing was over, the base returned to normal. No one spoke of the incident, and the people involved were quietly reassigned or dismissed. And me? I was left wondering what would have happened if we'd made a different choice, if we'd acted differently, if we'd listened to the creature, or if we'd helped it when it asked. In the end, we just sealed it all away, buried it deep under layers of secrecy. But sometimes when I lay awake at night, I wonder what we've really lost by keeping it all hidden. It was supposed to be just another training exercise, the kind we did all the time in Nevada. The sun was beating down hard, and the heat from the desert was radiating up in waves, making everything shimmer. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was flying with a squadron of 6 pilots, just another routine low-level pass over the desert, doing our usual maneuvers. We'd been briefed on the operation, and we were all more than familiar with the area. Nevada's desert had its own set of rules. You didn't go too low, you didn't go too fast, and you kept your head on a swivel. The landscape was full of hidden dangers, from rock formations to odd, jagged terrain. You always had to be alert. We were scheduled to fly over a stretch of barren land, a testing ground for various military exercises. There were no towns or civilians anywhere nearby, just miles and miles of emptiness, stretching into the horizon. The whole place was a perfect backdrop for training, but that day was different. It started with the radio. Our lead pilot, Captain Harris, gave us the green light to go ahead with the run. He was ahead, the rest of us trailing behind. We were all working in a formation, keeping in line as we approached the first low pass. The radio crackled once, twice, then went silent. At first, I thought it was just static. Happens sometimes, especially in this area. But then I looked down at my radar. There was a weird blip on it. It didn't make any sense. It was large, but it wasn't a plane or any kind of vehicle I was familiar with. It didn't match anything we were supposed to be seeing on this exercise. I tapped my comm button. Harris, do you copy? Nothing. Just static. I squinted down toward the desert. We were getting closer, and that weird blip wasn't moving. Something about it didn't sit right with me. There was a feeling that crawled up my spine, one I couldn't shake. It was like the air had changed, like it had become heavier. Harris, you still there? I asked again, my voice now a little more tense. No response. That's when I knew something was off. I banked slightly to the left to get a better view of the land beneath me. I couldn't help it. I needed to know what that thing was. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was some kind of mirage, like heat waves playing tricks with my eyes. But as I got closer, it became clear that there was something massive down there. The way it blended into the landscape, the way it seemed to disappear into the desert as if it was part of the earth itself. It was unnerving. My heart started racing, my palms sweaty on the controls. I don't know how to explain it, but the object didn't seem normal. It wasn't a structure, not in the way we think of them. It was different. Like it was made of something that didn't belong here. It had these lines, no, patterns, etched into its surface that looked like they were part of the ground itself. I'm telling you, the way it sat there, camouflaged against the desert, was unnatural. I pulled back on the stick, trying to gain some altitude. I was going to circle back and get a better look from above. I thought, maybe I was just imagining things, maybe the heat was getting to me, but I knew deep down I had to figure out what that thing was. I turned the plane and began climbing, trying to get enough distance. My radar was still showing that same strange blip. It wasn't moving, but it was there, and it wasn't going anywhere. I pulled my helmet down a bit, adjusting the comms again. Harris, do you copy? We've got something strange down here. Still no response. The radio was dead. That's when the rest of the squadron caught up, and I heard a voice crackle through the comms. Finally, it was Sergeant Miller, one of the newer pilots in the squadron. Sir, Miller said, his voice tight with tension. We're seeing it too. What the hell is that thing? I didn't have an answer for him. I didn't have any answers. I had never seen anything like it, and I'm sure Miller hadn't either. Everyone, keep your distance, I ordered, my voice shaking, but I tried to keep it steady. We don't know what this is. Stay in formation, but be on high alert. We circled around it for a few more minutes, trying to gather as much intel as we could, but the more I looked at it, the more I felt like we were being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something larger than us, watching from the shadows of the desert. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the blip on my radar went dark. It was like it vanished, like the whole thing had been erased from existence. Did anyone else just lose the target? I asked over the comms. There was a short pause, then Harris's voice came through, still static filled but clear enough to hear. Negative. It's still there, but I can't see it on my radar. What the hell was going on? I looked down again. The object was gone. Completely. It was as if it had never been there in the first place. But I knew it was. I had seen it. It had been real. Before I could say anything more, something else happened. I heard it, faint at first, but then it grew louder, a low hum vibrating through the air just below the threshold of hearing. It was coming from below us, from the ground. A deep, resonating sound that seemed to grow in intensity. I checked my gauges. Nothing was wrong. My instruments were all normal, but I felt something shifting in the air around me. It felt wrong. All of it. The hum intensified, and then the ground beneath us seemed to shift, like something was moving beneath the sand. I swear to God, I saw the desert itself ripple, as if the landscape was alive. We were all still up in the air, trying to make sense of what was happening when I saw it again. This time, it wasn't hiding. It was rising up from the earth, lifting into the air like it was alive, but not like anything I had ever seen. The shape of it was still blurry, flickering in and out of focus like it was being camouflaged by some kind of technology. It wasn't just the object that was strange. The whole area around it was shifting, like the air was warping, bending in ways that defied physics. "Get out of here!" I shouted over the comms, my hands gripping the controls, my voice shaky. "Everyone break formation. This isn't just a craft, it's something else." But it was too late. Before anyone could respond, the hum turned into a violent screech, a sound so loud it made my teeth rattle. The plane jerked violently, and I had to fight to keep control. The craft below us, if that's even what it was, sent out some kind of pulse, like a shockwave that rattled every piece of technology in my plane. My instruments went dead. The other pilots screamed through the comms, their voices distorted, some of them shouting that they were losing control, others that they couldn't hear anything anymore. I was flying blind. My controls were useless. All I could do was try to hold steady while the shockwave rocked my plane back and forth, trying to tear it apart. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the pulse stopped. The hum faded. The plane returned to normal. The desert was still. Silent. We couldn't get the planes back into formation. The comms were down. I knew that something had just happened, something huge, and we had all been a part of it. But we weren't going to talk about it. Not ever. We left the area. No one spoke of it after. We just flew back to base, unsure of what had happened, and when we landed, we were told to forget. There was no discussion, no investigation, just silence. I don't know what we saw that day. I don't know if it was alien or something else. But it was real, and I can't forget the feeling of something watching us, waiting for us to leave. We were told it was nothing, just a glitch in the system, some kind of mirage or malfunction. But I know what I saw, and I know the others saw it too. Whatever it was, it's still out there, hiding in the desert, camouflaged, waiting. I just hope it stays there. It's hard to even write this out. Every time I try to put it into words, I just can't shake the feeling that something's still out there, still watching. Maybe it's all in my head, or maybe it's something worse, but I know what I saw and I can't forget it. It's been months now, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. I used to be a fighter pilot in the Air Force. Nothing fancy, nothing special, just your average service member doing my job. But everything changed when I got pulled into a project that I never should have been a part of. I didn't know it at the time, but I was about to be exposed to things that no one should ever see. Things that were never meant for human eyes. It started off normal enough. I had been out of active duty for a while, working in a civilian contractor role for the Air Force. They wanted me to help out with some tech stuff they couldn't just let anyone handle. They didn't tell me everything at first, but when I got my first look at what we were dealing with, I realized it wasn't just any tech. It was something beyond anything I'd ever encountered. They didn't tell me what it was, not exactly. The room where they kept it was heavily guarded, the air thick with tension every time I went inside. The craft itself was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was small but sleek, and the material it was made of, it didn't look like metal. It was shiny but almost liquid, like something from another world. The design was strange, almost incomprehensible, but I could tell it was sophisticated. Too sophisticated. At first, I thought it was just some kind of prototype, some secret military tech. I was brought in to work on it, test its systems, help reverse engineer it. But the more I worked with it, the more it felt wrong. I began to notice things I couldn't explain. There were patterns in the structure that didn't make sense, and the lights on the craft seemed to flicker in ways that weren't normal. I started hearing things, faint sounds like whispers in the back of my mind, but when I turned around, no one was there. And then the visions started. It wasn't immediate. It happened slowly at first. I'd be working on the craft, checking wires or analyzing the data, and then, out of nowhere, it would hit me. A flash. I'd see the pilot's seat inside the craft. A figure, not human, but something else. The way it moved, the way it sat there, hands on the controls, it was like I was seeing through its eyes. I could hear its thoughts, its panic. It wasn't just a vision, it felt real. I could feel the dread, the weight of what was happening. The first vision I had, I thought I was just tired. I'd been pulling long hours on the project, and I figured I was just imagining things. But it happened again. And again, each time I saw more. I saw the alien's face. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. Its skin was smooth, almost translucent, and its eyes, they were huge, black and hollow, like they could see right through you. But it wasn't just the face that terrified me. It was the fear. Pure, unrelenting fear. I couldn't stop it. It was like the visions were getting more intense, more vivid, and soon I could hear the alien's voice in my head. It wasn't speaking to me directly, but I could hear its thoughts, its warnings. It was as if it was trying to reach out, trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand it. That's when it started to make sense, or at least, I thought it did. The visions began to form a pattern. The alien wasn't just warning me about the craft, it was warning me about something bigger, something coming. It wasn't clear at first, but over time, I pieced together fragments of its thoughts, spoke of an invasion, of ships arriving, of destruction. But it wasn't just one alien. It was a whole fleet, a vast armada, ready to invade Earth. And the more I worked with the craft, the more connected I felt to the alien that had once flown it. It was like I was tapping into its memories, seeing what it had seen, feeling what it had felt. The visions got worse, more frequent. Sometimes I'd be in the lab working on the tech, and suddenly I'd be there. I'd be inside the alien's mind, hearing its thoughts, seeing through its eyes. I saw the destruction it had witnessed. I saw entire planets fall. I saw them, the invaders, massive dark ships descending from the stars, and the alien was powerless to stop them. It was all just chaos. I tried to ignore it, tried to push it out of my mind, but it wouldn't go away. The visions were too real, too terrifying. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled into something that I couldn't escape from. That's when it all started to unravel. One night, after a particularly vivid vision, I found myself standing in front of the craft, staring at it in a daze. The air felt charged, like something was about to happen. And then I saw it. There, in the reflection of the craft's surface, was the alien. Not a vision this time, but the real thing. It was standing right there, as if it was watching me. And I could hear its voice in my mind, clearer than ever before. They are coming. I didn't know what to do. I was shaking, my hands cold, my mind racing. I backed away from the craft, but it felt like it was pulling me in. I couldn't escape it. The alien's voice grew louder, more insistent. You have to warn them. They cannot know the truth. They will come for you. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think straight. All I could do was stand there, feeling the weight of its warning. The next day, I went to my superiors. I had to tell them. I had to warn them about what I had seen. But they didn't believe me. They just looked at me like I was losing my mind. They told me it was just stress, that the work was getting to me. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to know the truth. I tried to fight it, tried to make them listen, but the more I spoke, the more they shut me down. They told me to get some rest, to step away from the project. They said it wasn't my place to question what was going on. But I knew. I knew that they were hiding something. They knew more than they were letting on. They knew what I had seen, and they didn't want the world to know. So I kept quiet. But the visions didn't stop. They kept coming, growing stronger, more terrifying. The aliens' warnings were becoming clearer, its fear more palpable. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the knowledge of what was coming. The invasion was real. It wasn't a warning, it was a countdown. The ships were coming, and nothing was going to stop them. No matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late, that we were all already doomed. I haven't been able to sleep properly since. I can still hear the alien's voice sometimes, even now. It's always there, lurking in the back of my mind, waiting for me to act, waiting for me to warn the world. But I know now that it's too late. It's already started. The signs are there, hidden in plain sight. The ships are coming. And no one will believe me until it's too late. I don't really know how to start this, and I've been putting it off for as long as I can, but I guess at some point I have to get it out. It's been a while since it happened, but the memory is still so clear. It's like it just happened yesterday, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. I'd been flying for most of my life. A career pilot, you could say. Not military, not commercial, just flying planes for a living. After all those years in the cockpit, I finally decided it was time to retire. I was ready to hang it all up. One last flight, just me and the sky. A solo trip, nothing fancy. Just a way to say goodbye to something I'd loved for decades. I picked a quiet route, something peaceful. No need for any grand adventure, just the calm of flying alone again. I took off in the early morning, the sun still low in the sky, casting that soft golden light over everything. It was beautiful. I felt the familiar hum of the plane beneath me, and it was like I was home again. For the first time in a long while, I felt calm. Everything seemed normal at first. I was up there, just me and the clouds, enjoying the quiet. I had my radio off, my focus solely on the flight. The world seemed so small from up there, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was at peace. But that's when things started to change. I don't really know how to explain it. It started with a feeling, a strange sensation like I wasn't alone anymore. At first, I thought I was just imagining it. But then I saw something in the distance. It was a shape, just a little dot at first, but it was moving. I didn't think much of it. Planes aren't uncommon up there, but this didn't look right. It wasn't a commercial flight, and it wasn't a military jet either. This was something different. I couldn't make out the details at first, but it was big. Too big for anything I'd ever seen. And it was moving in a way that didn't make sense, like it was hovering rather than flying. I've been flying for years, and I've never seen anything behave like that. I couldn't take my eyes off it, but it wasn't until it got closer that I started to realize what I was looking at. I've been through all sorts of weather, navigated around thunderstorms, and dealt with equipment failures, but this felt wrong. I should have turned back right then. I should have flown away, but I didn't. I just kept staring at it, frozen in place, as it slowly got closer. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. It looked like it was made of something. I don't even know how to describe it. It was sleek, almost like glass, but glowing, shimmering in the light. I could see no seams, no rivets, nothing that would suggest it was built the way anything I've flown in was. There was no sound, no engine noise, just the soft hum of the air around me. It was like the thing wasn't even trying to be noticed, yet it was impossible not to see it. I tried to get a closer look, but I couldn't. It was too high, and I couldn't adjust my altitude fast enough. I was just floating there, watching it, trying to understand what it was. It didn't move like a plane or a helicopter. It seemed to just float there in the sky, hovering. And I don't know how long I was staring at it, but it felt like hours. It felt like time had stopped. At some point, I felt it. Something coming from the craft. It wasn't a sound, not exactly. It was more like a feeling, a presence. I can't explain it any better than that, but I knew it was trying to communicate with me. I don't know how. Maybe it was the vibrations in the air or something in my mind, but I knew it was trying to reach out. And then it happened. The craft shifted, and for a split second, I thought it was going to crash into me. But it didn't. Instead, the air around me seemed to ripple, and suddenly the craft was just there, right next to me, hovering in the air no more than a few hundred feet from my plane. I remember thinking I should have panicked. I should have done something, but I didn't. I felt calm, too calm, like something inside me told me this wasn't a threat. It was something else, something important. I don't know how long I just stared at it, but eventually something happened. The craft, it began to communicate, not with words, but with images. It was like I was seeing a picture, like a slideshow, flashing before my eyes. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. It was flashes of scenes, strange landscapes, unfamiliar cities, and people that didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. Then, as the images kept coming, I started to understand. I could feel the emotions tied to them, fear, urgency, and then the images stopped. I was left with this overwhelming sense of warning. It was like the craft, like whatever was inside it, was trying to tell me something. A voice filled my head, not speaking to me directly, but still clear in my mind. You must share this. It wasn't in words, not really, but it was the message. You must share this. I remember my heart racing, my mind spinning. The urgency of it all hit me like a brick. But then, just as quickly, the feeling was gone. The craft drifted away, moving silently off into the distance. I didn't know what to do. My mind was flooded with everything I had seen, everything I had felt. I knew what it wanted, what it had shown me, but I didn't know if I was ready to share it. Who would believe me? Who could understand? How could I explain what I had just experienced? The craft didn't return. It just disappeared, fading into the sky like it had never been there at all. I kept flying, my mind still racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I don't know how long I kept going, but eventually I made my way back to the base. I landed the plane, but the ground felt too solid after what I'd seen up there. I couldn't stop thinking about the warning, about the future. For days, I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't even begin to explain it. But the message kept running through my head over and over. You must share this. And I still don't know if I should. What if I'm wrong? What if it was a mistake to keep quiet? What if telling someone puts us all in danger? Or worse, what if no one believes me at all? I don't know. But I can't forget what I saw. I can't forget the warning. And now, every time I look up at the sky, I wonder if they're watching, waiting to see what I'll do next.